if you are in a coercive environment for any period of time where the coercion comes to dictate things like what you feel, like I'll tell you when to cry. No, that wasn't cruel. I was doing this for your own good, stuff like that. In that sense, those experiences, when you're vulnerable, they cross the skin boundary because someone externally is telling you what you feel internally. And I can't remember the year, but it was connected to Keir McIntyre's PhD, and we published a paper, I think it was on dissociation, a good few years ago. It was the Journal of Dissociative Disorders, I think it was. And we laid out the sort of RFT model in a way of what happens when that skin boundary doesn't form or is broken, and your internal states are tacted and then dictated by an external source. And that break for us in the skin boundary in our clinical experience is enormously damaging because you don't own your own thoughts. You have to check what they mean through somebody else. So your sense of autonomy is just gone. Like if you think about the fun children have in lying, it's because they know you can't know. And that the whole development of deception around 8, 9, that's really important because you realize they don't have control of what's in here. But if you're as a young person or even as an older person, and that internal control, so what we sort of say, the locus of control that's internal becomes a locus of control that's external, and that sort of skin boundary is broken, then it leads to self-other roles dominating, and it leads to this massive attrition in any chance that the self-relating is going to have functions that are protective or empowering or whatever. So whenever that skin boundary is broken by one type of coercive control or another, the impact on the human being is just massive. It's a massively traumatic set of experiences because you're no longer a human being. You're just a thing that's dictated by something externally. So it's an incredibly destabilizing place to be. So when self-other dominates, we don't say, oh, that's just another way. It's a really serious other way. It's a really, really, really problematic other way. And in PBBT, we have to navigate that journey really carefully, because if you don't do that, the self-relating underneath that, you won't get to it. You won't be able to do the self-relating work, because it's like when you work with children, they live in their parents' house. You can't talk about freedom because they haven't got freedom, so that's just context. So in context where control by an external source is coercive, it's not a simple case if you just do the self-relating as you always would, because you won't be able to. The self-other dominates, so we have to weaken the self-other perspective. That's why the proxy work is so important. We have to weaken that self-other first before we get access to the self-relating. So it changes the trajectory. The moves are the same, but the trajectory is rotated or changed because of the dominance of self-other. But dominance of self-other is a very, very dangerous place for a human being to be.
I think the violation of skin boundary, I think that's a really nice way to describe that experience, because I think what people often walk out of those places with is looking at specific behaviors and trying to figure out, well, was that bad, or how bad was it? And society reinforces that of like, well, did you get hit? Did you get threatened? Did this, this, that, the other? And it's like, what I see is really coercive, high-level perpetrators can violate that skin boundary without ever, with a raise of their eyebrow.
Exactly.
Once they've trained people to know what to expect, or not know what to expect.
That's why I think victims can't leave. I mean, victims get frustrated but if the skin boundary is broken, how can you leave? I mean, they're your other half. They're, in that sense, they're under your skin. So you'd be leaving a part of you. And I think that's why it's so hard. It's why I understand people who don't present with the capacity to leave, even though it's highly aversive. I can really understand that in terms of the skin boundary metaphor.
And I think when those people come into therapeutic places and they get just a self-relating focus, and maybe from another something that's not as precise as PBBT as well, it can almost say like, all right, your anxiety is the problem. Let's work through your anxiety, rather than going, how do we get you like freedom from your history and freedom to be your own person again?
Exactly, because you're defined by another.
Mm.
I see that you're defined by another. I see that this is how it works. And let's talk about, before we talk about who you are defined as, let's talk about the fact that you're also predominantly defined by another, or this particular person. So I just think you just miss their lived experience of the skin boundary, and you miss the fact that a part of who they are is located in somebody else. It's just the nature of their experience, and that has to be dealt with before you can start talking about who they are.